Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Maxwell Maltz said, "Self-improvement is the name of the game, and your primary objective is to strengthen yourself, not to destroy an opponent." And Stephen R. Covey said, "Be patient with yourself. Self-growth is tender. It's holy ground. There's no greater investment." On today's episode, we talk about the art of self-improvement, the timeless truths that have stayed the same across different time periods and cultures, why these truths are as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago, and more. My guest is an exhaustion coach, a writer, a researcher, a former professor of cultural history at the University of Kent in the UK, and a lover of literature, psychology, and personal development. Her main passion is helping the weary transition from a state of exhaustion or burnout into a state of vitality. Her writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Times Literary Supplement, Psychology Today, and other media outlets. Please welcome the woman who's reminding us that new is not always better, and that sometimes it's the ancient models that hold the key to our most urgent present-day problems. Dr. Katharina Schaffner. Anna, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me to your show, Jay, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
It is my pleasure, and I'm thrilled that you're here with us today, and I'm super excited about our conversation. So let's dive right in. I thought, Anna, that a good starting place would be for maybe you to share with our audience what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say it's probably the fact that I'm really, really curious about other people. I have a deep curiosity about how people think, how they see the world, what makes them tick, what their passions are, what their desires are. I'm really, really, really genuinely interested in others, and I always have been. So I would say curiosity is a major driving force for me. And I'm also really keen on exploring other people's worldviews. I think I'm very interested in learning generally. I'm always open to new information, new facts. So yeah, I see myself as often as a little curious child looking around, and I think I've still kept a bit of marvel and the capacity for wonder.
I love that so much. And like you, that curious mindset and being open to other ideas and exploring different worldviews has been something that's been a bit more important to me as of late than it was in the early part of my life. But I want to tug on a string there for a bit and talk about your origin story. I want to explore a bit about your youth and some of the experiences that you had early in life that have not only shaped who you are today, but also have enabled you to be able to do the work that you do today, why the work that you do is so incredibly interesting to you. So let's start with maybe a bit of your origin story, where you grew up, and some early lessons that shaped who you are.
Yeah. So I grew up in Germany, as I'm sure you've all heard. And I think what has probably shaped me most is that I grew up in a commune. And it's probably less exciting than you might imagine it. It was my parents, when they had me, got together with their best friends, another couple, and they decided to buy a big house together. And then we lived together as one family. The other family, they also had 2 children. I've got a brother. And we had a shared kitchen, and we had, separate living rooms, obviously separate bedrooms for the parents, and the kids had their rooms scattered all over the house. But we basically grew up as one big family. We always ate together. The parents, had a system of whose turn it was to cook and to shop. And I still call the other 2 girls my sisters because we grew up together. And I think what was special about our experiment was that it lasted for 20 years. Normally those kind of communitarian living projects collapse at some point. And ours lasted for a very, very long time. And I think that was partly because my parents and the other couple were incredibly compatible. They were very different personality types, but in a complementary way. So my other mother was a very, very warm, very feelings, emotion-orientated person. She was a social worker. My mother was a teacher. She was very factual, a bit colder, a bit stricter. And then my father is a very gregarious, very chatty, very curious guy, and the other father was quite introverted, very mathematical in his mindset. So they were incredibly compatible, almost, covering the 4 different personality types, the ancient ones between them. So they worked really well as a team. And I think that early experience has also taught me that everything is relative. And I'm very grateful for that lesson because I had this alternative set of parents right in front of me. So what my parents did and said and how they showed up and their values and how they behaved wasn't quite the absolute model. It was for me that it is often for other people because I had an alternative set of parents right next to them and they did things differently and they saw the world differently. So I was always able to compare and contrast and to say, I like this about my parents, but I like that better about the other parents. And so I think that has taught me to compare and contrast and to be very interested in models and never taking one model as, the ultimate truth. And then I actually did study comparative literature, which is all about comparing and contrasting different literatures and seeing patterns and understanding systems and looking at what stays the same and what changes and why. So I do think, this kind of comparative curiosity was seeded in my upbringing and in that, style of living.
That is so interesting. It truly is. How did your parents meet the other couple that you ended up living with for 20 years?
I think they were university friends. They met at the university and they just decided, why not join forces and buy a bigger house together and share the parenting. And it really did work tremendously well. And I have to say that when all the kids moved out, our parents sold the big house, but they're still really good friends. They still see each other at least twice a week. We still celebrate Christmas as a big family, and we still share important birthdays, and we're still all in touch with each other. So that bond is still there.
That is super interesting. So this became a societal norm for you at an early age. At any point, did you ever question why there was this dynamic, and maybe you had friends who didn't have that same situation? Was this ever a question mark in your mind, kind of following that line of curiosity? Why are we doing this?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think I was really grateful for the choice I had, the kind of role model. I had 4 people I could go to with different, very specific problems. But I would also say that I'm now living the opposite. I have 1 child and, I have one partner in 1 house, and I'm very very into privacy, so I think I am compensating at some level, because I really, really cherish my own space and my privacy, and lots of me time, and I'm quite introverted as well, so I think that model of living wouldn't really be for me, although I did enjoy it as a child, but as an adult I would probably say no thank you.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I feel you on that one. So what are some personal philosophies that you have, or values, either personal philosophies or values that guide your life today that really are at the underbelly of decisions that you make, how they guide your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am really fond of Stoicism. I would say I'm very, very influenced by Stoic thought. And, at a very simple level, the idea that there are some things we can't control and there are some things we can control. And I try to, when I can, when I am at choice, I try to direct my energy towards what I can control and not worry too much about the uncontrollables out there. So I am very interested in watching my thoughts and managing my emotional reactions, especially if they're not helpful, as they often are. So I'm really keen on observing, and I'm also a huge fan of acceptance and commitment therapy, and that's also a model. In fact, I use both models in my coaching practice as well. So acceptance and commitment therapy is very much about observing what is there, accepting what is there, rather than fighting what is there. So cognitive behavioral therapy is very much about reasoning yourself out of unhelpful states and countering irrational thoughts with rational thoughts. But acceptance and commitment therapy is very much about accepting that we have irrational thoughts and we have irrational emotions, and it's about accepting that they're there, looking at them, observing them, but not getting too caught up in them. So in acceptance and commitment therapy frameworks, we talk about diffusion. So we become the watchers, the observers of our thoughts, rather than getting entangled. So a simple example would be, rather than saying, I'm really angry, you would say, I notice that I'm angry, or I notice that I feel anger, or I notice that I feel sadness. So you notice it and you acknowledge it's there, but there's a bit of a gap between you and that emotion. And that gap is all important, because it allows us to not get sucked in.
Yeah, this is an important piece of the conversation, and I want to explore this a bit more deeply with you. But I can see where you, based on the research that I've done on you and consuming your content, reading your book on self-improvement, I can see where Stoicism and ACT would be an integral part of the type of coaching and the work that you do today. How long have you had an interest in Stoicism specifically? And it also sounds like there's maybe some layers of Buddhism in the work that you do as well.
Yeah, I would say probably for at least 10 years, and it has deepened. And I would also say that what was a really important developmental moment for me was when I started to leave academia. It was a long process. It took me 5 years, but I am now no longer at the university. And it was when I went from being interested in theories and models and writing and teaching towards, how does that actually work in real life? What about the experiential dimension and what really helps people? And it was actually while I was writing the Art of Self-Improvement that I started to train as a coach, because I was like, I really need to understand how any of this works in practice. And I've always been interested in psychology. I would say that was another really early interest. I was I was torn between literature and psychology. I studied literature, but I've always had this kind of longing to explore psychology more deeply. And I've always, firmly believed in our capacity to improve ourselves. That was a very, very important credo for me. And it was partly also because, I had my own share of psychological struggles as a teenager. So I had an eating disorder. And therefore I started to read, psychological explanations and self-help books, and started to experience therapy at quite a young age, and that interest has remained firm, and it's still there now. I feel like that I am finally able to marry my interest in literature and psychology and coaching and theory and practice. For me, it has all come together in the last couple of years.
That's brilliant how you're able to mash up all of those amazing areas and be able to deliver something of value that gives you purpose, that gets you excited, that allows you to show up as your best self. It really is. It's an amazing thing to see when you're able to pull the lens back and see it from a different perspective. So 10 years of really delving into Stoicism with more of an interest here, let's say, as of late. Now, you were in your university job for, was it 15, 16 years, maybe up to 15 years or so?
Yeah, almost 17, I think.
Almost 17 years. Amazing. Yeah. So what was that transition like for you? Because it didn't happen overnight, as you said, right? This was something that you had been working toward. But when you finally made the decision and actually acted on it, what was that process like for you? And how did you feel? What was that feeling like for you, if you can describe that, when it was your last day and you were walking out that door?
Yeah, I mean, celebration. I was jubilant when I actually had my last day. It was a long process, as you said. It was. I would say I was very happy in academia for at least 10 years, and it was absolutely my right kind of environment. I was very, very, blue in my interests, very theory orientated, very model orientated. I loved writing. I loved systems and understanding them and comparing them. So it was very rewarding, and it was the right environment for me for a long time. But then I began to realize that there was something missing, and that, that actually a more important challenge for me would be not just to live up here, but also to, to live more wholesome and to integrate emotions and other things back into my way of being. I think a lot of academics can be quite caught up in their heads and a bit detached from their feelings. I would also say that I've always loved teaching, and I still love teaching, and teaching will be the one thing I will miss terribly, but I didn't enjoy being part of this particular institution in the last couple of years. There were various reasons for that. My subject wasn't doing very well. The working environment became ever more toxic. It didn't bring out the best in people. I would also say that academics are very critical people, because we're trained to be critical. We're trained to think critically, and that really can take unpleasant forms, that people can't celebrate other people's successes. They can't just like something. They can't just be supportive. They always have to find the fly in the ointment, the worm in the apple. They really are critics. They're very critical thinkers. And that has positive aspects, but that has also quite negative aspects. So I'm very excited to have joined the world of coaching, where people are very warm and supportive and much more collegial, I would say, than in academia. And I also just didn't feel like writing in jargon anymore. That was something else that I just didn't want to do anymore. I want to write in a way that is understandable. I think I can communicate what I have to say in language that is more accessible, and I just got very tired of the kind of publication machinery that is attached to academia. So for me it was definitely a liberation, and now I just want to coach and write, and those are my two passions.
What a great place to be. And as you were telling me this, it reminded me of that saying that when we can't change our circumstances, we're forced to change ourselves. And I might be butchering that a little bit. I'm not sure if that's the exact quote, but something along those lines. And so, here you made a decision. You drew a line in the sand. You knew that in order to change, you were going to have to change yourself, or at least change where you currently stood within the university. So good for you for deciding to follow your passions and make what can sometimes be a difficult decision, but it sounds like in your case it was absolutely the right decision to make. So as you were talking about Stoicism and ACT, you had mentioned, when you had referred to Stoicism, about being able to create that little bit of space so we can decide how we want to respond to an event, right? Knowing the difference between the things that we can control and the things that are outside of our control. So speak to us, if you will, what you do today to create that little bit of space so you don't get pulled into something, so you can respond as opposed to reacting. What does that look like for you? What are you thinking about, and what are some of the steps that you take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also have an 8-year-old daughter, and I also try to work through some of her issues by making her, introducing her to some of those techniques as well. But I would say first and foremost would be the practice of noticing negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts, right? So whenever I don't feel quite right, I try to chase the origins of that feeling, and it's usually unhelpful thoughts. So it might be something like, oh, my writing is no good, or it can even be something like, oh, nobody likes me, I don't have any friends, or, I messed this up. It can be, we all have those kind of thoughts, I think ultimately there are kind of 5 toxic stories out there that we tend to tell ourselves about ourselves. And that can be like, I'm ugly, I'm unlovable, I mess everything up, I'm a loser, I'm unworthy, I'm bad at some level, right? I think most of us will be familiar with versions of those narratives, and they will pop into our heads quite regularly. We all have one story that haunts us more than others. And I think for me, the most important thing is to notice that, to go like, here's your unlovable story. And then to observe it rather than getting completely caught up in that story, and to really notice these thoughts with and turning them into our object of attention rather than being in that story and getting sucked into it and believing that it is the truth. I think for me, one of the most soothing thoughts is that we are not our thoughts. We are having those thoughts. We're telling ourselves these unhelpful stories about ourselves, but they are stories, they're words, they're thoughts, and they're either helpful or they're unhelpful. And, just looking at them with that kind of distance and looking at them as noise rather than the truth about ourselves can be incredibly empowering. I'm not saying that it always works. I mean, obviously, I have moments when I get totally sucked into my negative stories, but I also manage to get out of them again.
Well, that's the awareness piece is tremendous. And I had interviewed Ethan Kross, who wrote the book Chatter on Business Minds Coffee Chat. And in that book, he defines what chatter is, which is when we really do go down that rabbit hole, right? Where we're telling ourselves that story and we just get so lost in that story that it keeps us from being able to really navigate out of it. So he talks about tools and strategies. But to your point, those stories that we tell ourselves, we all deal with that, right? It's just part of the human experience. But when we can acknowledge it, when we can be at least aware of when it's happening, and then we can start to ask ourselves better questions, right? There's things that we can do to change the energy in that moment, right? To at least create that little bit of space that you were talking about before. That's really interesting. And I think it's incredible that you are teaching your 8-year-old daughter some of these same tools that she can use, because what a great experience to be able to learn those at an early age and to be able to talk about those, because often we, especially when it happens when we're young, because I certainly experienced it and it caused all kinds of self-esteem issues and self-worth issues and all kinds of things, but I didn't have anyone else to talk to at the time. And you've created the space to be able to do that, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, you are truly giving your daughter a gift that can help set her up for success.
Yeah, and I wish people would, I wish schools would also do a bit more on that front, because emotional literacy and recognizing your emotions, accepting them, including the ones that we find difficult, like sadness or anger or irritation or frustration, just recognizing them and getting kids to being able to say, oh, I'm feeling sad right now. That capacity in itself is already really, really important. And I would say that about this generation Alpha, they are quite good at understanding their emotions more generally, because I do think it's more part of our culture now to talk about emotions and to pay attention to our mental states. And I think schools could still do more with regards to training the skills of understanding what's going on in your inland empire. But I think our kids have a better vocabulary and they have more people to whom they can turn, generally speaking, when they want to talk about their emotions. It's much more acceptable to talk about emotions these days, and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. I agree with you there. I also agree that we could do a better job in the schools and starting early so we can have the conversation and not have it be stigmatized, right? Where we can have the conversation and where you can learn how you can regulate those emotions and feelings that you have. Now, I love the term that you used, inland empire. Did I hear that correctly? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, very good. So being able to manage our thoughts, control our thoughts, things along those lines. So I want to talk about your book, The Art of Self-Improvement. And this is a topic that has been fascinating to me for years. And I can remember the moment where where self-improvement and self-help first came into my consciousness. And I'm curious from your perspective, with all of your research and all the work that you've done up to this point, what is the difference, if there's a difference, what is the difference between self-help and self-improvement?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say self-help I see as a genre. It's a genre of writing. It's when people who have something to teach write instruction manuals for their readers designed to enable the readers to help themselves. So self-help is a big industry as well, of course, right? With lots of big personalities, courses, programs, gurus, workshops, publications and so on. So self-help I would see as the kind of field and the genre. Self-improvement is what it is all about, right? And I would say self-help is quite a modern phenomenon. So I would say the origins of self-help are in the 19th century, when we, encountered the very first proper self-help texts, such as Samuel Smiles' book with the same title, Self-Help, which was all about, how you can rise economically, how you can improve your status, how you can use willpower and, hone your virtues and your character, and it took off from there, that genre. There were more and more. There was a huge demand. It was published in the same year as Darwin's On the Origins of Species, and it was a massive massive bestseller at the time. But I would say self-improvement is for me a more neutral term. It's not just about enhancing and optimizing and maximizing our capacities. I think for me, self-improvement also relates back to the ancient arts, which were very much about virtues rather than just, personality features. So the ancient art of self-improvement had a distinctly ethical and moral dimension to it. Which I would say one of the key differences I have seen between modern self-help and ancient self-improvement doctrines and theories is that the ancient self was interested in becoming good in a moral sense, in an ethical sense, right? They wanted to be good in a sense of committing altruistic acts or doing something for others. They saw themselves very much as relational beings, and the ancient Greeks were big on the character virtues. So in that sense, there was that ethical dimension, and I think some modern self-help, but not all, and there's great self-help out there that doesn't fall into this trap at all. But I think some modern self-help is more about maximizing our skill sets so that we can become more effective in a neutral way, right? You can be effective as an altruist. You can be effective as a wonderful member of your community. Being effective as such is not a bad thing, right? It depends on what we do with it. But I feel it often stops there, making us more effective. But effective to do what, right? I mean, there has to be something that we do with our capacity to be effective.
Well, I appreciate you explaining that and articulating it the way that you did. I think that helps give us some additional context around the verbiage itself. And it's interesting when I think about the origins of self-help, as you just explained with Smiley's. That book came out, it was 1859, I believe, when it was published. And I didn't realize until I was researching you that the self-help genre had really started that far back. I'm so used to hearing Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, or The Power of Positive Thinking, books along those lines that, those books came out in the 1900s, and they seem to be the first books that many people think about when they think about the self-help type of genre. Now, I'm curious, in your research, have you done research on the dark side of self-help and what you have seen developing over the years? Are there certain areas of self-help that maybe aren't used for good and for good purposes, but you see some dark aspects of self-help?
Yeah. I would say that is to some extent a question of taste, what appeals to whom and why, and what people are interested in exploring, what particular areas they want to grow in. But I'm personally not a big fan of manifesting. I will say that, because I do think that manifesting also has a longer history. It reaches back into the 19th century and into the New Thought movement. And in that period, some self-help writers came up with the idea that our thoughts have a magnetic force and they can attract good things into our lived experience, right? And Napoleon Hill, to a certain extent, falls into that tradition as well. And the idea is that we can attract positive outcomes of what we desire into our lives by thinking positive thoughts. And that's, of course, a really attractive idea. Who wouldn't love that idea to be true? But I do think it's one of the more dangerous ideas that is being peddled in some self-help books. And The Secret is a prime example of that kind of thinking. And manifesting is a more recent trend that also revolves around the law of attraction ideas. And I do think the problem with these ideas is that they overestimate our agency massively. It's almost like magical thinking. I agree that having a positive outlook on life, being an optimist, having some faith in our efficacy, our agency, our ability to shape the world is important. And without that, we wouldn't act. And without that, we wouldn't try, and we wouldn't be able to be successful in certain areas. But I do think the idea that we can just sit there and think, I want to be a millionaire, and then checks will come through our mailbox is very dangerous, because people don't actually do inner work when they do that. They just, repeat some mantras that don't necessarily change their problems or address their blind spots. I do think all great self-help requires some serious inner work, some serious contemplation, some reflection on what we're good at and in what areas we might have to grow. And also, if you think the manifesting logic to the end, there is a victim blaming dimension to those kind of ideologies, because basically we get what we deserve, right? That's the idea behind it. And if we fail to think, bad things happen to us because we fail to think positive thoughts. And of course, life is not that simple, accidents happen, people become victims of violence, of genocide, of whatever, and to even indicate that it might be because they haven't been thinking positive thoughts or weren't optimistic enough, weren't attracting the right forces into their lives, I think is a very dubious ideology.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you used two words that I want to emphasize here for our audience just a moment ago: act and try. So those, in my view, are the missing components when you talk about The Secret or manifesting. All good things, everything that we do begins with an idea, right? With a thought, with an idea. But if we want to actually see something happen, we have to attach action to it, right? We have to do the work. As you said, do the inner work. That really is where it begins. It begins with us and it ends with us. No one else is going to do it for us, but we have to know, we have to have, as Napoleon Hill would say, that definiteness of purpose, right? Knowing what it is we want, having a goal, and being prepared to do the work. And obviously there's other variables, right? There's surrounding ourselves with other people who can help us, that can help coach us, that can help fill in some of the gaps that we may have, kind of using the mastermind aspect that Napoleon Hill talks about. But action is everything. And if you're just going to sit there and think about whatever it is that you want to come into your life, but you're not willing to do the work to bring it to fruition, that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, fully agree with you there.
Thank you for So thank you for sharing that. So I've heard you mention before that self-improvement is our most important essential task. Our most important essential task. Why is that?
Because for me, I think self-improvement is a form of learning. And learning is one of my core values. And I think learning is absolutely what makes us special as a species. You know, we can learn, we can pass on knowledge. And learning also means that we can grow. And learning means that we can also learn more about ourselves. We can understand ourselves better, and we can then become more able to direct our energies outwards rather than wasting them on the inside, you know, in battles between our ego and our super ego, or with negative self-talk or chatter. I do think that self-improvement is really about making us more masterful in our own house so that we can direct our energy outwards. And therefore, I also don't think it's a selfish undertaking, because it's more, you know, it's more problematic if we just stay in the dark and act out and get triggered and don't know our patterns and just keep on making the same mistakes. But I think if we manage to understand ourselves better and understand our blind spots and our patterns and where they might be coming from, we can then really direct our energy to projects and people and do something worthwhile, something good with our energy rather than wasting it. There's an energy question there as well. I think it's very much about channeling our energy and not letting it kind of dissipate.
Oh, you are so right there. And I mean, that is one of the that is an area that I can selfishly say that I have struggled with in the past. I'm much better at it today, but being able to channel my energy into the most meaningful areas. Again, it kind of goes back to knowing the things that we can control and the things that we don't control, and putting our energies into those things that we can truly influence, where we can make a difference and where we can see change happen, where we can see a greater return on our investment of energy, of time, of resources, etc. So yeah, I'm right there with you. So you mentioned something in what you were just saying, which really becomes the very first of the timeless truths that you write about in your book, The Art of Self-Improvement, and that is knowing thyself. So here's what I would love to be able to do. We're going to put a link, obviously, to that book in the show notes, because I think it's an important book that everyone that's watching and listening right now should absolutely go out, purchase a copy of the book, and read it. And most importantly, not only read, but as we were just talking about, taking action, right? Doing something with the information that you learn, because it's a very detailed and interesting book. So obviously, we don't have time to go through every single area of the book, but know thyself. I would love it if you would just briefly maybe pick 2 or 3 of the timeless truths. I have a couple of my favorites, but I would love for you to share a few of them and maybe give an example for our audience of what they can expect when reading this book, and why that timeless truth that you speak to is so important.
Yeah, thank you. Let's start with know thyself. You know, I do think when we want to improve, we need to really start by understanding what is there and where it came from and what forces may have shaped us. You know, what are the key episodes in our lives that have been transformative, that have been low points, high points, turning points, and what are the patterns we keep repeating? I'm very interested in patterns, and I do think we all have patterns, and just developing an awareness of what our patterns might be is already so important. You know, understanding that, oh yeah, I tend to do this over and over and over again in my relationships. This keeps coming up, or I keep having to quit my job. Why is that? Or this and that always triggers me and makes me respond in a furious, irrational way. So understanding where this is coming from and what may have, generated these patterns is really important. But then, as you said, Jay, then we need to do something with that knowledge. And I think that's where coaching and also therapy can play a hugely important role, because if we just have abstract knowledge about ourselves and it doesn't sink in, it doesn't impact on how we see the world and ourselves, it doesn't change the structure of our feeling, then that knowledge is quite useless, right? I'm sure you've experienced that as well. A lot of people who have been in therapy then come to coaching because they're like, okay, I understand many of my problems now. I understand where they're coming from, but I still can't really overcome them, right? It's still a kind of knowledge that needs to be translated into action. It needs to be, it needs to sort of start living in the body and not just up here. And that's a really, really tricky part. And I think part of the, know thyself chapter is also just understanding what our natural preferences are. Are we introverted? Are we extroverted? Are we thinkers? Are we feelers? Are we very intuitive, or are we very, sense information driven? Knowing the basics is already really important. And a lot of people don't know that, right? A lot of people actually don't know what their natural preferences are. And just understanding that and then embracing it and going with your strengths is hugely important and can be very transformative.
So I'm going to interject here for just a second. I want to make sure that I'm accentuating the point that you just made as you were talking about knowing thyself. This is a game changer. For all of you that are watching and listening right now, through this conversation, there's a lot of great information that's been shared. If there's one takeaway from this that can make the biggest difference for you in how you show up to the world, making change, improving in areas, different aspects of your life, it is absolutely around knowing thyself. And the interesting thing is, Anna, is I've been reading about and studying about knowing thyself for years, out of necessity, but for years. And I remember the first time I came across the that verbiage. I'm thinking, what? I know everything there is to know about myself. What could I possibly be missing? And of course, we didn't come with an owner's manual, right? We learn something new every single day, but we have to be intentional about understanding why we do the things we do, the things that may trigger us, right? The best places that we should be spending our time and our energy, all of these different areas. So thank you for bringing that up. I just want to make sure that everyone that's watching and listening right now understands how vitally important this one aspect is. So keep going, Anna.
Yeah, thank you. And also, just following on from what you just said, I think self-knowledge is also something that is very hard to acquire on our own. We do need to develop self-knowledge in human interaction because we have our stories, we have our narratives and cognitive assumptions about ourselves, but they get tested when we encounter others, right? And I think one of the beautiful things about coaching is that we can help our clients see their blind spots, right? We're like a mirror. We can kind of reflect things back to them that they may not have seen, or from an angle that they may not have been aware of. So I think self-knowledge is also something that needs some dialogue. Because without it, we just often stay stuck in our own narrative, and no one challenges it, no one enlarges it, no one enhances it. But moving on to another of the truths that is very important to me, that is mentalize. Mentalizing is the ability to imagine the world from somebody else's perspective. And that's hugely important in our interactions with each other, right? And again, it comes down to preferences. When we talk to someone, or when we want to work with someone in a productive way, or when we need something from someone, we need to understand how they may see the issue, and what is important to them, and what matters, what kind of language they might use, what kind of metaphors they might use. They can all give us clues about what people care about. And mentalizing, I think, is a key aspect of all great relationships, right? We need to be able to say, okay, how might you see this? You may see this very, very different from me. And I think that's also one of the beautiful things about coaching. You really understand that people see the world very, very, very differently from you. And whenever I make an assumption, it gets challenged, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whenever I think I know something about someone, I don't. And I realize just how badly wrong I was, because we always project. We always think people think like us, and they may see things like we do, and they don't. And it's so rewarding and enriching to really fully understand that, to understand that, we don't see the same thing when we're looking at the same object. We might see it from very different perspectives. We might focus on very different details. We might value different things about it. So the idea that, we are all hugely different, and we tend to ignore that fact, and we tend to think we share more than we don't.
That is so true, and this is so difficult for many of us. It's been difficult for me, and it's still difficult for me, right? I'm a work in progress, but we all see the world through different lenses, and those lenses are replete with bias and the way that we were brought up and content that we consume, the people we spend time with, and we have a tendency to spend time with people who look like us, that think like us, that share the exact same ideas and beliefs that we do. And when we do that, we're not typically challenged, right? Because it's like-minded people that are coming together. But the moment we step outside of that bubble, if you will, and we confront reality, it's like we think that our way is the only way, and that our way is the way that it's supposed to be, and that only I know the truth and you don't. And it's, we're in a highly politicized environment today, and I try to make a point to learn from other people. I try to surround myself with people who think very differently than I do, so I can ask better questions. Is it uncomfortable at times? Of course it is. But if I'm showing up with the sole purpose of curiosity and understanding so I can learn and grow, versus being able to only share my point of view and point fingers and say you're wrong and I'm right, if I'm learning, I'm growing. But I have to be open to it. So I this one I love, and you go into great detail in the book, and it's an excellent chapter.
Thank you. Yeah, and I fully agree with you that, we are so stuck in our filter bubbles, and we kind of demonize and vilify the people outside, and we kind of really need to start talking to people with whom we disagree again in a civilized way, and it's interesting. It is, as you say, it's learning, and it's also about, expanding our horizon and understanding that people can see things extremely differently. And I think in times of political polarization, it's a skill that is particularly important, and that we really need to remember again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And maybe another chapter that I might mention is the chapter called "Be Present." Being present sounds so simple, and yet it is so hard. it's probably the hardest thing because we're always either in the past or in the future, right? Very few of us have that capacity to really be with someone, to really listen, to really focus on them, to really concentrate, and to really just be here now without being elsewhere mentally. And, it's, of course, our technologies don't help and we get ever more distracted. And many of the devices we use are designed to grab our attention and to hook us and to make us addicted. And, so I think it's not an even playing field. Our attention is really more under threat than it ever was before. But interestingly enough, humans have always struggled with paying attention and concentrating. I've just reviewed a book on monks and their strategies to focus their attention. And you would think that monks, of all people, are the ones who can concentrate because they're contemplatives. They do nothing but concentrating and praying and meditating all day. And you would think that that's a natural skill and they're all really good at it. But when you read that book, you become aware that the medieval monks have really struggled to stay focused. And for them, it was even more important than it was to us because it was their job to concentrate on the divine. And failing at that had, terrible consequences for them. That was like the one thing they were supposed to do. So distraction for them was a mortal enemy. And they came up with fantastic strategies to focus their attention, many of which we still use. Quite a lot of the productivity and concentration strategies that we now still engage with actually have really ancient origins. So we're not the only ones who find paying attention, staying in the here and now, and not getting too distracted really hard. But I think we are in an age where it's getting ever harder, because of what we discussed. The technological side of things really doesn't help with that task.
No, it really doesn't. So do you allow cell phones at the dining room table?
No.
Good
We put phones away. Phones away. It's rude.
I would agree with you. And we're at a point now where when we are just general having conversations in the evening, that phones they're either not in that room or they are turned on silent and we're not looking at the phones because, to your point, we can get pulled so easily away from a meaningful conversation and we lose the ability to connect. We lose that ability to truly connect heart to heart and have those meaningful conversations. So we are putting some rules in place to ensure that we are minimizing those distractions as much as we possibly can. And I would share with you that we still have some work to do, but we're making good progress.
Same here. We're by no means perfect.
Yes, absolutely. So I appreciate you sharing 3 of those truths. And for all of you that are watching and listening right now, again, this book, it is 10 timeless truths. And the great thing about this book, one of the things that I love so much about it, is that you, Anna, you weave history, you weave different cultures into this book. And these are the 10 timeless truths that have shown up, that are common themes, time and time again through all of these different texts around self-improvement. So what a beautiful gift that you've given all of us. So I appreciate you going through some of those timeless truths with us. So
thank you.
I wanted to, absolutely. So as we are wrapping up our conversation today, these conversations go so quickly, but I'm learning so much from you and I appreciate it. I'm curious, today, how do you overcome moments of self-doubt or adversity? So with all the tools that you've learned, what is something specific that you're doing today to overcome those moments of self-doubt or adversity?
I think I increasingly want to see development as learning, as learning, and learning that can also have hiccup moments, where I might fail or might not do something very well, but it's still learning. I get bored easily, I will say that. So I need to always have a new challenge. I need to explore new territory. I feel like as soon as I can do something very well, I almost am ready to move on to something new. But that also means that, I fail a lot, and I kind of make a fool of myself at the beginning when I learn a new skill, but it's okay. I'm getting more relaxed about that, because I do
Good
think
for you.
ultimately the value of learning and growing is more important than
Yeah,
how you may look at a certain moment in your developmental journey.
absolutely. That is so good. So, before I ask my final question to you, I would love it if you would give all of us a challenge. What would you challenge us to do?
Okay, okay, a challenge would be to think about what you most want. Like most people have something that they really want to achieve, and then to ask yourself, why? What will that give me? Because I often find that with coaching clients, they don't want to do certain things anymore, or they really want to achieve X, Y, and Z, but often there's not much behind it, and you're like, okay, but why? Right? So, for example, I really want to become richer. Then the question always has to be why? What would your money buy you? What would it give you that you don't have? Is the exchange worth it? Time, money. Like, you always have to question what you desire further, and think about what that will enable you to do. So, for example, some clients want to lose weight, and then the question is like, what can you do when you're thin that you can't do right now? So you have to invite people to really envisage what it is they really want, and it's usually not what they think they want. There's usually something else behind. So, for example, when you want to become thin, the desire is often not for thinness, but it is for better connections, or more ease with other people, confidence, or it might be a desire to connect more deeply without anxiety. It might be a desire to be healthy and to be physically fitter, to have more energy. There's always something else behind what we think we want. So I would invite you to question what you want, and to ask why. What will it give you that you don't have
Well,
already?
I'm going to do that. And for all of you, I hope you're going to do exactly the same thing. It kind of brings to mind the Socratic method, where we just keep peeling the layers of the onion to find out why, right? Why do you want that? Why is that important? How is that going to
Yeah.
benefit you? How is that going to transform and change your life? Things along those lines. Just keep exploring it. So I love that challenge. So, Anna, here is my final question to you. What is one of the most valuable, unexpected lessons that you've learned from a client, and how has it impacted you? So, one of the most valuable, unexpected lessons learned from a client, and how did it impact you?
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have to cheat and give two examples. So the first one is,
Sure.
we already mentioned that we don't know people. We can't make any assumptions. I think, whenever I think, is that what you're saying? Or I analyze something a client has said, I sum it up, and they will be like, not really. And then they nuance it, and it's actually something else they meant. So that kind of grappling with what they're really going through is always so useful and such an important learning process. But I will just give an example of a session I had today, where one of my clients, who's struggling with burnout, actually said something really interesting, and it's something that is at the heart of burnout, because when we're burned out, we can't allow ourselves to rest, but we also can't work properly anymore. We're trapped in this kind of gray zone, that ashen territory where we can neither work nor allow ourselves to rest. And this client said, you know what I've really understood is that when I'm exhausted, I just strip things away. I try to do less. Which is already good at some level, to try and minimize your task load and to do less of what tires you out. But then they said, but what I realized is that I also need to do more of the things that energize me. So the danger is when we just stop doing things because we're very tired and burned out and weary and exhausted. We do less and less and less and less. But what we also do when we do that is we cut off our source for nourishment and revitalization, because we also need to do what energizes us. That costs energy at some level, but it also gives energy back. So I think a lot of burned out people fall into that trap of just resting and not doing anything much at all anymore, and they cut out their chance to heal and re-energize. So we need to do what gives us energy, and that can be meeting other people, that can be exercise, that can be traveling, that can be whatever it is that works for you. But that is one thing we do need to do.
Wow, 2 great lessons. Thank you for sharing those. I appreciate it. And Anna, thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you sharing of your wisdom, sharing your insights, telling part of your story and what is most important and meaningful to you. And I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for a fantastic conversation, Jay. Really enjoyed it.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our bandwidth, our reach, and attract amazing guests just like Anna. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of The Art of Self-Improvement, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.